Welcome to another edition of the Heat Check podcast. We have Barry Jackson. We are lucky to have Barry Jackson for a second straight episode. Barry, how are you?
Oh, Andy, it's great to be with you. And the trade deadline is one of the most anticipated days of the year for Heat fans, right?
It is. It wasn't very eventful this year. At least the trade deadline day wasn't eventful. The Heat made their move 2 weeks ago, acquiring Terry Rozier from the Charlotte Hornets for Kyle Lowry and a first round pick. Um, there was always a possibility they could do something else, but it seemed unlikely. And they didn't. The trade deadline passed without another move. Other contenders got better. Other contenders were very active around the deadline. Boston, the Knicks, especially, the Pacers, Philadelphia, even Milwaukee made a small move. Um, Barry, were you surprised that the Heat did not make another move after getting Rozier?
I don't think either of us were just because of the limited tradable, realistically tradable assets they had. Even if they were willing to move Niko Jovic, his salary was such that it was too low to get any sort of quality veteran at 2.5 million. And then having traded a first round pick for Rozier, it was clear that the Heat did not just want to trade its final available first round pick in exchange for a player who wouldn't make a seismic impact. That's a first round pick you wanted to hold on to and not trade for the likes of a Dorian Finney-Smith. And then, unless they were going to do a major move, there really was no path that I could see with their cap situation being below the second apron, above the first apron, where anything would have made sense. So I don't blame them for not making any move today. To me, the next move will be the fascinating one because that will be the summer. We'll know how the season plays out. We'll know whether this core has reached its natural expiration date. And so to me, that will be the fascinating one. I don't think there's anything they could have done on the margins or around the edges today that would have really appreciably changed their position in the East, which to me is, clearly a tier below Boston, probably not as good as New York, but yet you couldn't say definitively that they couldn't beat New York in the playoff series. They did last year against the next team that wasn't as good. So I still think, despite all of their struggles, they're in fairly decent shape, depending on their first round matchup and potentially their second round matchup.
Yeah, no, I agree. I did not expect maybe the only I think you agree with this, Barry. The only thing maybe we thought was a possibility was them trading Drew Smith's salary to maybe to open up another roster spot or save more money against the tax, but they did not do that. But like you said, the two most realistic candidates that he could have traded probably at this point was Caleb Martin because he's on, not he has a player option, but he's probably on an expiring contract. He's probably going to opt out. So that was kind of the decision that he had last year with Gabe Vincent and Max Strus. Do you trade them, even though they're helping your team right now, to cash in and get something for them, or do you risk losing them for nothing in the offseason, but they're helping your team at the moment? And once he was elevated to the starting lineup, it made it even like that much more clear they weren't going to trade him, right? They move him to a starting role. He's played better. He's just too important to this team right now, especially when they already invested a first round pick to add to this team to then kind of go the other direction and trade one of your more important players just because he might be a free agent in the offseason just didn't make sense. And like you said, they had so many, I mean, half their roster minimum contracts and very low end salary players that you're not going to get anything substantive for those guys. So I didn't really expect much. So it's not a surprise, but yeah, I agree. Uh, it'll be interesting to see what their next move is. The buyout market, right? I know they're limited in their options. We can go over that now. Um, it doesn't seem like the buyout market is going to be as in as helpful as it was last year for them when they got Cody Zeller and Kevin Love, who were two guys who immediately were part of the rotation after signing with the Heat last February. I don't think that will be the case this year. But there are some intriguing options, I think, for them, in the buyout market in the coming weeks.
Yeah, the names that the Heat would be eligible to sign, and a lot of our viewers and readers know this, but the Heat is
Hmm.
ineligible to sign anyone who's making more than 12.4 million this season. The Heat's in a bucket with six other teams, including Golden State and Boston, who are precluded from signing players whose contract this year calls for them to make more than 12.5 million. So that would take off the table Spencer Dinwiddie, Marcus Morris, several others. So the guys the Heat would be eligible to sign would include, I'm going to read you some names. Tell me who to you stands out from this list.
Yeah.
Killian Hayes, DeLon Wright, Otto Porter, Danielle House, Shake Milton, Seth Curry, potentially, Devontae
Hmm.
Graham, Furkan Korkmaz, Patty Mills, Kira Lewis, James Booknight, Robin Lopez, Corey Joseph, and of course Oladipo, who still is recovering from last May's injury. So no one to me jumps out at that list. If you
Yeah.
look at it, Anthony, through this prism, is there a guy on this list who's going to supplant one
No.
of your nine rotation players?
No.
And yeah, I'm with you. I would say no. So at that point, you're just filling a roster spot, I
Depth. Yeah.
suppose, is depth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I guess Daniel House is interesting. Seth Curry can shoot, so that would be helpful. Delon Wright does some good things. Otto Porter Jr. and Thaddeus Young are two names that have feel like been linked to the Heat for years, but at this point of their careers, like, how much are they helping you? Um, Danilo Gallinari maybe is a possibility. He's another buyout candidate that is under the 12.4 million that would be possible. But again, at this point of his career, how much is he helping you? So yeah, I would expect him to do something because they have the open roster spot, and why not? Right? They're already in the tax, so it's not like they're trying to avoid the tax. Um, but I just don't see any of those guys, like you said, immediately becoming part of the Heat's rotation, just like Kevin Love did last year, and even Cody Zeller.
Right, where Love comes in and he's a starter initially.
Yeah, exactly.
House would be intriguing to me if you were shooting better from threes. He's a low percentage on threes this year. The Otto Porter 4 years ago would have been intriguing
Right.
before he's been decimated by injuries. I know obviously people will view Killian Hayes as a type of project that he traditionally takes chances on, as we've seen with RJ Hampton, former first round pick with athletic skills. But again, is he more of a developmental guy for them at this point as opposed to a rotation player? I'm with you on DeLon Wright. I think he's got a skill set that could help. Patty Mills, if they feel a need for another ball handler, and they've seldom shown a desire to add third string point guards over the last
Yeah.
6 years. So I'd be skeptical of that. But that would be a name as far as a guy who's playoff tested, can shoot, and can handle. Kira Lewis, a guy who just did not develop as a draft pick. I'm not sure they invest time in him. Some have mentioned Robin Lopez, but does he do anything more for you than a Thomas Bryant would?
Probably not. No, I just don't
Yeah,
see it moving the needle that much. I mean, another option is, and I don't know if they'll do this, but you could promote one of your two-way guys to that 15 spot and sign another developmental guy, whether it's Jamari Bouye or Alondes Williams, who's been playing really well with the Skyforce. I mean, that's another option, right? Or you can sign one of
absolutely.
those guys to a 10-day contract if you want just to buy time, um,
Right.
and get some extra depth and maybe see what Alondes can do, or Bouye, which they've done in the past, signed him to 10 days in the past. They could do that as well. So they have different ways they could round out the roster, but I think our point is this is the rotation. This is it. Like
Right.
I don't see them making a move now past the deadline that's going to significantly change the rotation or starting lineup, or they're going to add another four, or they're going to add another. I think this is it. These are the nine guys. Maybe Haywood Highsmith eventually emerges back into the rotation, or Jovic, but I think these are the nine guys that you're going to see when they're healthy. Eric Spoelstra rely on consistently.
Absolutely. And what we saw on Wednesday night is what they're going to need to be good teams, which is their top three players playing at a very high level. We saw it against the bad Spurs team on Wednesday. The schedule obviously is toughening now, six of the next seven against good teams beginning on Sunday against Boston. But you're not only going to need your top three to play well, you're going to need two of the other role players to play really well as well, whether it's Rozier, who has from an assist turnover ratio, he's been very, very good 50 assists, 11 turnovers. Obviously, shooting percentage well below his career average. You feel like that will turn at some point. And then you need one among Duncan, Caleb, Love, perhaps even two among those three to be really good every night. So to me, those would be the X factors. But if you look at the moves made by teams around the league today, Anthony, especially teams competing with
Mhm.
Miami for playoff seeding, what stands out to you as a move that you think uh, pushed that team a little bit ahead of Miami or more than they had been or closer to Miami?
this isn't a move that's gonna like change the complexion of this team, but I really like the Boston's trade for Xavier Tillman. I think they needed front court depth. He's a nice, bench big who's going to help them, with physicality, rebounding. He can block some shots, pretty good defender, can finish around the basket. Not a great finisher actually, but he could score a little bit if he gets the opportunity. But I think they needed front court depth, especially with Porzingis and his history of injuries. And that was a good move that addressed that need. So I would point to that one. I also think the Knicks did a lot. I mean, you even just go back to their trade for OG, and then today they had Alec Burks and Bogan Bogdanovic, two guys who could score, which the Knicks need because their defense is very good, especially with OG. But they needed guys around Julius Randle and Jalen Brunson that can create their own shot and make outside shots as well. And those two guys can do that. So I think the Knicks, I mean, they're probably the big winner of the trade deadline, and they did all these moves, but without giving up a first round pick, which is very impressive because now they still have their first round picks to make another big swing in the offseason if that becomes a possibility. So Knicks seem to be building something there, and like you said, I don't think you can definitively say they would beat the Heat in the playoff series because we saw what the Heat did last year. He probably even with Jalen Brunson playing so well, that he probably still have the best player in that series because Jimmy Butler in the playoffs, as we've seen the last week or two, is a different type of player. But the Knicks are better. That's for sure. The Knicks are, I think, talent-wise, roster-wise, just their depth, a top four team in the East on paper.
I agree. I think you have to commend them for everything that Leon Rose and the front office have done. Alec Burks, as you mentioned, to me, very underrated
Yeah.
acquisition. 12 point a game guy. He shot between 40 and 41% on threes every year for the last 4 years. So he's going to replace some of what they lost in trading quickly to Toronto in the Anunoby trade. Obviously, Bogdanovich can score. So to me, this is possibly the second best roster in the East. You could make the case it's Milwaukee, depending on what Middleton you get. Are you going to get an in his prime Middleton, or are you going to get an injured, hobbled Middleton? And to some extent, what Brook Lopez still is at this point in his career. Is he prime Brook Lopez or is he declining Brook Lopez? So to me, those are the second and third best teams in the East behind Boston in whatever order. Cleveland, I know, is second at the
Cleveland's
moment.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you know, I've been skeptical of them only because you wonder if that particular strategy of roster building with a lot of size up front is going to work in the postseason when teams play small, more teams like Miami playing wing fours, right? Like Caleb Martin. So you wonder about that. And also, as great a player as Donovan Mitchell is, this is not meant at all disrespectfully. He needs to prove something in the postseason for you, or at least for I, to have considerable confidence in the Cavs. So that's why I tweeted that a 2-7 Heat Cavs matchup, I think, would be the best possible scenario for Miami if they don't rise. But there's also the possibility the Heat could move up in the standings because Philly has just been awful without Embiid. They're
Hmm.
4-12 without him at the time of this taping. They're 3 games ahead of Miami at the moment. The Sixers are in fifth as of shortly after the trade deadline on Thursday. The Heat's in seventh. Indiana is in sixth. So to me, if the Heat can begin playing well, it's very realistic to see both Indiana and the Heat jumping Philadelphia. I think the 76ers are going to continue to give up a lot of points. They'll win some games and shootouts when Tobias Harris and Tyrese Maxey, and now their new acquisition, Buddy
But
Hield,
he
have big
healed. Yeah.
nights, but they're also going to give up a lot of points. They don't have much in the interior. Remember, there had been talk of Philly pursuing size to replace Embiid. To this point, that has not materialized. They were not able to get Andre Drummond from Chicago or any other center. They'll probably look for size on the buyout market. So to me, Philly is very vulnerable, and that's why I think there's a real chance the Heat could move up to 6 or 5, depending on how Indiana plays. But the hope, obviously, is to get out of the play-in spot at 7. You see what as the Heat's seeding ceiling, knowing that they've got a difficult schedule stretch coming up, but also knowing
Yeah.
that they have Detroit 3 times left, right? They have
Right.
Washington twice, and they have Portland twice.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, they technically have one of the easier schedules remaining if you look at just opponent win percentage left, but they do have some tough games coming up. You looked at the upcoming three: Boston, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, and then they come back from the break and they go on a what is it, a 4 game trip or 5 game trip out west. So it's a very tough stretch coming up, but I think the best case right now for them is 5. Like you said, I think obviously Indiana's reachable. They're only 1 game ahead of the Heat at the time of this recording. Philly's only 3 games ahead, and they don't have Embiid for a while. It seems unlikely that they would catch the Knicks, right? The Knicks are playing really well. I know that Julius Randle's out, but they just added to the roster, and they're 5.5 games ahead of the Heat. I mean, that's a lot. So I think 5 is best case scenario, but like you said, I think the goal at this point is just get out of the playing tournament. Because if you can get
Exactly.
out of if you can get out of the playing tournament, and get that week off to reset, you face a third seed, whether that be Cleveland or New York or Milwaukee. Um, it, that's not the best. That's not where he want to be, but it's better than last year, right? It's
Exactly.
better than last year. So I think that should be the goal from now on. Like from here on out, just avoid the playing tournament. If you can get to 5, great. But I think 6 is definitely attainable if they could stay healthy, and they can continue playing this way.
And regardless of whether they're 7 emerging from a win in a playing game and
Yeah.
clinching the 7th seed, or whether they're 5th or 6th, you're going to be looking in the first round at Cleveland, Milwaukee, or New York in all likelihood, unless the Julius Randle injury causes the Knicks to plummet and Indiana somehow jumps them, which seems unlikely to me. So Milwaukee, New York, or Cleveland in the first round. You know my preference from a Heat perspective. Your preference would be who as an opponent from Miami's perspective?
This is going to be very controversial, I think.
Hmm.
But I'm going to say Milwaukee.
Because of defense
Yeah, I
or
just
lack
think
thereof.
I think lack thereof. I think they're one injury away from being um, not a very good team because they're so thin, right? They're just they don't really have good depth. Um, Obviously they still have Giannis and Dame, so there's that. But between all those teams, I would say Milwaukee only because of their depth and their defensive issues. Cleveland, I know they haven't done it. Your points are correct. We still don't know if this translates to the playoffs, but they played small this year. When Mobley went out, they were playing a smaller lineup. They won a lot of games. So it seems like they could play both styles. They have talent, a little deeper than Milwaukee, obviously a better defense than Milwaukee, and they have an elite scorer in Donovan Mitchell. So I don't know. I think I'm kind of buying Cleveland right now. I think Cleveland is a legit, 2, 3 in the East. Like they're going to be tough out in the playoffs. So I don't know if I'd pick the Heat against any of those teams, to be honest, right now. But if I had to pick one opponent, I think I would go with Milwaukee.
Yeah, and I agree with you on the Bucks bench. It would concern me. They added Patrick Beverly today, who's
Yeah.
got a history with Doc Rivers, so he gives them a defensive component that they've been lacking. But obviously, he's past his prime. So you're looking at a bench of Portis and Jay Crowder and Patrick Beverly. Is that enough coming off your bench? Even though obviously you've still got a loaded starting lineup, albeit an older one with Middleton
Hmm.
and Lopez and Lillard. So I'm with you. Milwaukee is vulnerable. I'd still rather face Cleveland, but we might agree on this. I think the Knicks at this point
Yeah.
would be the last team you'd want to face among those three, just because it looks like they've really done a good job from a personnel standpoint of putting together a team that can make a serious run in the Eastern Conference Finals.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're deep. I think they're a really good defensive team. They have a guy in OG that didn't have last year they could put on Jimmy, and not saying he could shut down Jimmy, but just a better option to guard him. And then Jalen Brunson as a guard, yeah, the Heat might put Jimmy on him, might put Caleb Martin on him, but the Heat have issues with guards like that. I mean, they don't their backcourt is they're not made of the best defenders. So there's a lot of areas where Jalen Brunson could take advantage of in a series like that. So yeah, I think the Knicks, again, while I wouldn't definitively pick the Knicks over the Heat because we just saw what the Heat did against the Knicks last year. The Knicks are much better than they were last year. Um, and I'm not so sure the Heat are better than they were. Right, at this point, we can't say the Heat are better than they were last year in the playoffs, right? They haven't been as sharp. It's kind of been an underwhelming start to the year. So yeah, I would go with Milwaukee and then Cleveland and then probably the Knicks of those three that of the team I would least want to face in the first round.
I think the Heat is on paper more talented than the
Yes.
team that advanced through the playoffs because they have Hero and Rozier and Hawkes. The question is, do they have the grit and the intangibles and the defensive bent that you need to advance deep into postseason? I think they miss Gabe Vincent's toughness. I think They missed some of that with Struess as well. Uh, Now, the changes that Spolstra made this week, I was curious your thinking on this. Having Jimmy start the fourth quarter against San Antonio, obviously there were some rotation tweaks. Having him playing more with reserves, Tyler in a bit of a different role, Caleb going back in the starting lineup. Tell me your thoughts on all of that, and do you think that's going to be the solution?
I think it's interesting. I think it was there's some moves there that I think are make a lot of sense, but I don't know yet until they face some good teams, right? I mean, Orlando, they beat Orlando in that first time, that was the first game they used this new rotation. Orlando's been good. They've been competitive, almost the same record as the Heat pretty much. Or maybe no, I think they're half a game behind the Heat now. But they're not an elite team. Then they face San Antonio, which is one of the worst teams in the NBA. We're about to see against Boston on Sunday and again against Milwaukee and Philly. And hopefully it doesn't have Embiid, but still it'll be nice, a good test for this team going into the break. But the most interesting part of the change to me is the fourth quarter, Jimmy, the way they're using Jimmy to start the fourth quarter. Because for the last 2 or 3 years, I mean, on Twitter, fans have been begging Eric Spoelstra to change that part of the rotation where Jimmy sits for the first 5, 6 minutes of the fourth quarter. By
Yeah,
the
and
time he
5:58
enters,
remaining, he's coming in,
yeah, he's
and
coming
they're
in, but
down
the Heat,
9.
exactly. By the time he comes in, the Heat have been outscored by 15 points in the fourth quarter, and they're chasing when he comes in, and it's desperation. And now you're setting the tone in the fourth quarter. You have Jimmy Butler on the court, usually with 4 reserves or 3 reserves, pretty much a bench lineup, but everything's running through Jimmy. It almost forces Jimmy to be aggressive because he's anchoring a bench unit. He has the ball in his hands. Everything's running through him. There's no Bam Adebayo or Tyler Hero on the court. He has to be the guy, and it's really worked the last 2 games. So I think that part is really interesting. Again, you're not starting the fourth quarter, without with Jimmy on the bench, and then the other team goes on a run, and you have to bring Jimmy in early to stop the bleeding, and it goes haywire from there. So this is a little different. The other thing I like is kind of staggering Jimmy and Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero's minutes. Where like Jimmy, other than them starting the game together in the second half together, it's pretty much Jimmy with and sometimes closing the game together, obviously, but in the in between stretches, it's Jimmy with the bench, and then it's Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero with 3 other guys, and it's kind of everything's running through Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero pick and rolls. A lot of times it's Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero, and Terry Rozier, and it's just a pick and roll heavy unit where it's Rozier Bam pick and rolls or Hero Bam pick and rolls, and that's just really effective. And you see it's helping Bam get easier baskets, and it's helping Tyler and Terry too find space off those screens. So I really like what they've done, but I have to say I have to wait until they face some quality competition until I say, well, they've turned a corner. This is a breakthrough. I'm just not ready
Mhm.
yet.
I'm with you. I love that we're seeing more pick and rolls with Bam and Tyler. I found it very interesting last night that Tyler said we moved away from that recently, and that wasn't a smart idea. I found that to be an interesting comment. Tyler said we have to continue to do more of that. Spolstra was very complimentary of the amount of time that Bam and Tyler have spent communicating about different actions in practice, after practice. So that's certainly very encouraging. I also like that there's sort of I guess, meritocracy would be the word in selection of players who play late in games. Spo has always shown a willingness to go with the hot hand late in games, and now he's got 9 pretty good options. I include Love as the ninth option only on nights that he's playing really, really well. Maybe he's like 4 for 7 on
Mhm.
threes. And there have been those nights where Love has made a real difference on the floor. We saw a double double in like 15 minutes. So he'd obviously be that night. But you could make a case for Jaime off the bench playing late in games. Some games you could make a case for Duncan, obviously. So they've got 8 or 9 guys that they could make a case to go to late in games. Obviously, Jimmy and Bam will always be on the floor. So I like having that option. I think when healthy, this roster is pretty good. I think they're better, and I know they say you are what your record are, but I
Yeah,
think when healthy, they should be better than what they are at this
they
taping,
should
which is
be.
4 games over
Yeah,
500. This to me should be, especially Philadelphia not having Embiid, this should be, in my mind, a top 5 team in the East if healthy. Now they have to prove it, and what I say that they should be makes no difference if they don't prove it and if they don't show the defensive mettle that they've shown these last few games. Because I think all of Heat Nation was stunned to see the open dunks, the lack of help, the lack of alertness and sharpness and effort
Yeah.
defensively that we saw during the 7 game losing streak. That appears to have been corrected. Now, they're still giving up too many open threes. We saw several rim out by San Antonio and Orlando these last couple of nights, but at least there's more effort. They've corrected issues in terms of giving up open dunks where help doesn't come over, comes over too slowly. So
Yeah.
that's encouraging. So to me, the big issue now is, will they start shooting the way they did in the first 2 months of the season?
Yeah, I think, and I was about to ask you, during this 4 game stretch, other than the rotation changes and, the positive results that's produced, what's been the most encouraging thing to you during this 4 game stretch? And I'll point to the defense because defense during this 4 game stretch has been number one in the NBA. It's a very small sample size. They haven't faced the best opponents, but um, they're the number one defensive rating team in the NBA. And the thing is, to me, their ceiling will always be based on their offense because their offense, even during these 4 games, is like 22nd, 23rd. It hasn't been good. There's a big enough sample size that even when this team is healthy, this roster just doesn't produce an efficient offense. And in the playoffs, they got hot. They started making threes. Jimmy Butler turned into Michael Jordan, and we know how that turned out. But in the finals, the offense again was the issue. They were scoring 80 points, 90 points. It was a struggle for them to get to over 100. So I still think, as much as I said in the previous episode, I'm concerned about their defense because they have some minus defenders in the rotation this year more than usual. Eric Spoelstra is a very, very good coach that he usually can find a way to have a top 10 defense with whatever roster he's given. He finds a way. To me, it's the offense that continues to be a concern. And like you said, the outside shooting has something to do with that. The lack of finishing around the rim continues to be an issue. Um, all the mid-range shots, not usually the characteristic of an efficient offense. So if I picked one encouraging thing, it's the defense getting back on track and probably Jimmy Butler turning into Jimmy Butler and playing this way again. But I still am concerned about the offense.
I am too. I think at some point they're going to need Rozier to return to what he was in Charlotte from an efficiency standpoint, 36% on threes,
Yeah.
46% from the field. It's mystifying that there's been a 9 game shooting slump. You figure just historically that's got to turn. Even if he's just a 35% guy from threes, that would be better than the low 20s that we've seen in his first 9 games with the Heat. And Tyler has to be efficient, obviously, too. He has been these last couple of games. So that's encouraging. So I think if they get efficiency from both of those, that goes a long way towards solving any offensive issues. Bam has to hit the mid range shot more consistently than he did in January. We've seen him kind of turn for the better offensively over the last week, even though a lot of his baskets have come on lobs, right at the rim
Yeah.
from Tyler primarily. With Jimmy, what we've seen these last 2 weeks, as you said, probably that along with the defense have been the most encouraging
For
signs.
sure.
I was going to ask you about the 3 point game of Jimmy. We've never seen him make threes in 10 straight games like we've seen over the course of the last 10. We've never seen him shoot threes so efficiently. He would be top 13 in the league in 3 point percentage if he had enough shots to qualify. He's in the mid 80s now in terms of 3 point attempts, but shooting 44% on threes. Is this sustainable? I wouldn't put anything past that man because he's
Yeah.
so gifted. You could see him potentially becoming a 40% 3 point shooter, which he is this year in the latter stages of his career. I guess the question is, and he discussed this after the game with you the other night, the question is, what's the proper diet of those in his offensive arsenal?
I think it depends on the defense, right? The defense continues to give him open 3 point shots. And if he's hitting them at a 43, 44% clip this season, you have to take them, right?
Right.
Like last night against the Spurs, you were there. They were sacking off him, daring him to take those threes. And he did. And he missed a few, but he made one or two, I think, again last night. Um, so I think it depends on the scouting report. As long as they're giving him open shots, it seems like he's going to take them. He's not going to take, if they start guarding him tight on the 3 point line, he probably won't take as many, but that opens up other parts of his game. Do I think it's sustainable? I don't think he'll shoot 45% all season, but can he shoot 39, 40% at this point? I mean, we're already more than halfway through the season. I would say yes. And if that's the case, if he's open, he has to take it. I mean, this team needs players to put up 3 point shots. They don't have the highest 3 point volume in the league. They need spacing. Not that Jimmy's all of a sudden turned into Duncan Robinson and space the floor, but it makes defenses think a little bit. And if that helps Bam Adebayo get an open layup or an open dunk, or Tyler Hero get a driving lane, or Jaime Hawkins to get a backdoor cut, that makes a difference. So I think that's important. I'm glad you pointed that out. That's an important development that we started to see a little bit toward the end of last season. But he's taking it to another level this year, and it is a very interesting aspect of kind of his evolving game as he gets older. If he could, we saw Dwayne Wade do it, right, where he wasn't the best 3-point shooter, but he became an effective one late in his career. If Jimmy can do that, it's going to prolong his career, not just for the season. It's going to prolong his career in general.
No question. To me, it's interesting. You've got before the end of February, 7 games. 5 of them are really difficult. One is somewhat difficult. The game at Philly, which I don't put in the category of the most difficult just
Right.
because no Embiid. Then you got a 7th game against Portland. So to me, the really difficult ones, Boston Sunday, at Milwaukee Tuesday, then that 4-game Western swing at New Orleans, and then at Sacramento, and then that trip closes at Denver. So you have those 5 games plus at Philly. To
Yeah.
me, I need to see competitive efforts in most of the 6. I probably need to see 3 wins or 2 wins, but close losses in the other 4 games to have a good feeling about this team. If they go 1-5, even if the games are close, I'm not going to feel as though they've crossed that threshold of becoming a team that we should take very, very seriously as a team that could make a push to the NBA Finals again. Because, as you've noted in your stories, I think 7-16 against teams with winning records, they
9
have
and 16 right now.
9 and
Yeah.
16.
Yeah.
Thank you. They have to be able to prove that they can go on the road or at home against Boston on Sunday and win a couple of these games. They can't go over with this stretch of Boston, Milwaukee, Philly, New Orleans, Sacramento, Denver.
Yeah, ideally you see them take 2 of the 3, right? You get revenge on Boston at home, and then you split those Milwaukee Philly games, which yes, Philly's gonna be tough. Second out of back to back on the road right before the All-Star break. But they don't have Embiid. They're without Embiid, they're not a top 4 team in the East, obviously. They're not as talented as the Heat when they don't have Embiid. So the Heat should win that game, right? So
Right.
I think if they can close this stretch out before the break at 2-1, you go into the break feeling pretty good. They're probably either in 6th place or tied for 6th place at that point in the Eastern Conference. You have some momentum going into the break. But yeah, it is important. If they go 0-3 or even 1-2, still your struggles continue against these good teams. That's the questions are going to linger about, can this team compete with good teams in this league, because they haven't proven that this year. So I think this is an important stretch for them, not even just before the break. Like I said, the trip coming up with Sacramento and Denver, New Orleans, like there's a lot of tough games. We're gonna find out a lot about this roster in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
And one last thing, I don't know that
Yeah,
there's another move that Spo can go to as far as starting lineup, unless he were to go back to Highsmith. I
Nico.
think this is it. It
Yeah,
right, exactly. It's hard to imagine, even if it gets bad, him removing Rozier or Hero from the starting group. Spo has repeatedly talked about the upside of this group. He's downplayed the defensive concerns. He wants to make it work with these two.
yes,
And I think even if they're at a defensive deficit some games or size deficit, I just don't see him changing that as a starting backcourt at this point.
I agree. I think it's especially now. I mean, we're already 30 games away from the end of the regular season. At some point, you got to build some continuity as long as there's health, right? They've had 27, 28 different starting lineups. This one makes sense. It's almost like Spo said, like, I'm not going to overthink this. I'm going to play my best 9 guys, right? And that's what I'm going to go with. That's what he's done. He's playing his best 9 guys, since he made the change to the rotation and kind of simplifying things, and it's worked. And we'll see on Sunday again against the Celtics how much better they are, because they lost by what, 45, 70 points, 80 points the last time Boston came here.
Right.
They shot like 90% from the field. So it'll be a good measuring stick, I think, for this team just before the break. I think Zoom is about to kick us out again. So I think we'll end that there, Barry. Thank you so much for doing this again with us. If you don't already, follow Barry Jackson at FLA Sports Buzz. Follow me at Anthony_Chang. We'll have heat coverage for you throughout the week, throughout the weekend. No more trade stuff, but we'll be on top of the buyout situation. So make sure to check out MiamiHerald.com. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.